Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. I'm Nicole Dorfman, Director for React Alliance. Thank you all for being here. I just want to, before we even get started, give a big thank you to David and Hank, who are here giving us a professional audio-visual experience. So thank you so much. Okay, well, I am going to turn the mic over first to our president, Mandy Davis.
Oh man, I always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to do this. Test. Test. Are you there? I'm not certain I am, but there we go. Okay, you guys, there is so much that React Alliance is pursuing and following up on. And I am tonight going to tell you about some of the stuff that I'm absolutely positive you haven't heard about, because they are things that we are engaging in both on a state and a federal level. I just finished drafting a letter that represents numerous entities to the Department of Transportation. So here's the outline of a couple of things that REACT is doing, and it's ongoing. Right now, it's really important that as a state, we address all of the infrastructure issues. And the biggest one in this state, besides the infrastructure in Long Beach, is the one in Humboldt. It has become very clear to us that the Department of Transportation under the Biden administration illegally issued that DOT grant for almost $500 million. So we have researched all of the paperwork. We've taken a look at the infra laws, and what we have done is I just finished drafting the letter. It will go out tomorrow, notifying the DOT that that grant that was issued was illegal for numerous reasons, and they should rescind it. Here's why it's so important to us, because if that facility does not happen, it is basically going to blow out the entire infrastructure plan for California all up and down the coast. Here's a second. Yeah, this is a big deal, you guys. Keep your fingers crossed on this one. The second area that we are basically throwing big old monkey wrenches in is a law that it's a federal law, and it's under the Department of Interior, and it is called the OCS-LA. The OCS-LA was not addressed in any of the permits, either on the East Coast or the West Coast, when it comes to permitting for offshore wind. They did not address two main areas: the fact that these permits would significantly impact the current uses for those areas, including fishing, and also all of those permittees are supposed to be primarily or U.S. corporations or companies, which half of the lessees are not. So these are two really big areas. We're going to be diving into that area. We are going to be contacting the Department of Interior, BOEM, and basically blowing the whistle on the OCS-LA infractions. So we're going to be moving forward on those things. Another thing I'm really excited about, and we covered it in our member letter for the month, is we are going to be hiring, or we are looking to hire, a consultant. Her name is Maureen Coates. This woman I have been talking to for months. She lives on the East Coast. She is very familiar with offshore wind. She has worked within our government in several different capacities for over 4 decades, and she's just a dynamic human being. She has already done an in-depth study on the East Coast for green oceans, and she's agreed to do one for us. We will be able to utilize all of this information, not just on a local and a state level, but we will be able to team up with the other the other entities that have put together this information and present it to the federal government as further argument against offshore wind. So we have a fundraiser, and we need to come up with that money before we can hire Maureen and set her out there with her bulldog ways and to get into everybody's face and get all the information. She's an amazing human being. So please take a look at that. Donate if you can. Spread the word, because Maureen Coates is going to be a huge part of our offshore wind fight in the future. So I just wanted to fill you guys in on these things. They're very, very encouraging. It is going to take a lot of time and effort, and keep your fingers crossed on the DOT, because stopping that facility would be huge. And I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, and she's going to give you some information on local. Yeah. So Maureen Coates, in order to be able to basically to pay her for the entire project, start to finish, would be $10,000. And what we need is a minimum of $7,000 to even sign the contract, so we know that we can cover our cost. Any other questions? Cool. All right, Nicole.
Maureen, who she's talking about, her business is called Planet A. Planet A Strategies. So if you want to learn more, you can look that up. It's also in the newsletter. She's incredibly credible. And one of the things everybody says is follow the science. So that's what we're trying to do. We're here to create the research, and she's really the person to do it. So this is our fundraising campaign to raise $10,000 to pay for that study. Okay, a couple things I want to bring to your attention. One of them is that the Coastal Commission has had a big shakeup. I believe that there are going to be 4 to 6 new members, new commissioners. The commissioner that was represented our area, his name's Justin Cummings, had been made the chair just, I don't know, a few months ago. He's gone. He was not kept, along with the vice chair. So we're getting brand new leadership. I don't understand the ins and outs of why all that happened. If anybody does, please enlighten us. But so there is a big change, and which is an opportunity for us to reintroduce ourselves and to welcome the Coastal Commission to Pismo Beach in July. So they will be here July 9th through 11th at Pismo Beach. You'll be hearing more. We're definitely going to organize something. So keep your ears open for that. I did find out that the new person who's representing Morro Bay, his name is Christopher Lopez. He's from Greenfield. I was told he is the first commissioner who doesn't even live on the coast. But he is on the County Board of Supervisors for Monterey County. So I'm looking forward to meeting him. The other thing I want to tell you about is something that's been happening. Quite a few people brought it to our attention, that there are some videos popping up on social media telling everybody how great offshore wind is, Port San Luis is perfect, and please write and let everybody know that you support it. So we looked into this. Who are these people? People are even going door to door, like knocking on doors, leaving flyers. We think they're connected. Don't have evidence of that yet. But, so Avila Beach is actually being targeted. This group is called Greenlight. There's a group called Greenlight America, and their subsidiary is Greenlight Action. From what I could tell, in 2023, they had maybe $50,000 in assets. 2024, somehow they had $50 million in assets, okay? So according to their website, they offer, in quotes, a network of clean energy partners, end quote, to help ram through projects through local government bodies over the objections of the local people. So they are located in Washington, D.C. They are big money East Coast lobbyists who I believe are representing the interests of the big energy. So according to the CEO's LinkedIn profile, Greenlight America is an independent nonprofit focused on mobilizing grassroots power to win local siting and permitting campaigns that get more clean energy projects built more quickly across the country. Fossil fuel funded groups and local NIMBY efforts are doing a great job, I guess that's us, turning out constituents to block clean energy projects while supporters are not showing up. Okay, so this is not grassroots. Grassroots means from the ground up, like React, like you. This is what we call astroturf. They are pretending to be grassroots. Or greenwashing. So it's great if you go to the little video, and if you get the newsletter, it's linked in there. If you read all the comments, I think I read 50, and there was not one single positive comment. So it's great. Yeah. That's your, yeah. So that's exciting. So another way that Port St. Louis, Avila Beach is being targeted is currently there are 3 studies that are being commissioned at Port St. Louis. We know one of them is a Mott McDonald study, $3 million study paid for, well, by us, but it's through the county. And then I believe Port St. Louis, oh no, then there was the California Energy Commission gave money to do another study. And then there's a study by the would-be developer, the Clean Energy Terminals. We also know that Harbor Board Commissioner Bob Vesely was at the Pacific Offshore Wind Summit in Sacramento just in May as a roundtable panelist representing the hundreds of elected officials throughout California who embrace offshore wind. So I don't know who told Bob Vesely that his constituents embrace offshore wind, but he's out there representing that's what's happening. So if you live in Avila Beach or near Avila Beach or have a special love for Avila Beach, we really need people there who can help organize, like an action team, who can maybe be semi-autonomous. Of course, we're always here for support. I know Ellie's been down there a lot, getting signatures, talking to people. I know other folks do that as well. So if the folks down there could start maybe organizing a little bit, you know, we really need people to hand out the educational materials, talk to people, attend PSL meetings, that sort of thing. So if that's something, okay, yeah. So if that's something you're interested in, please let us know. We'll help connect you to other people down there. We also have a bunch of yard signs by the front door. They can go anywhere. We're asking for a $10 donation for the yard signs, just to pay for the cost. If you don't have $10 and you want one, please take it, okay? And then the other thing is we have our big fundraiser coming up, July 26th. We spoke about it at the last meeting. We have the posters in the back now, so please take a few, you know, 5 or 7, and put them up in your communities. We really need to just get the word out to the whole Central Coast. Put them up everywhere. Be wonderful. Sometimes I even just tape it into the back window of my car, so when I'm driving, people can see it. We also, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. We're going to need a lot of volunteers the day of the event, which is Saturday, July 26th. So we need setup, we need cleanup, we need people to staff, you know, the entrance. We need people helping with the informational, the merchandise. There's lots of things. But if you're available that day, please sign up and help us out, and then we can help organize. And then we also, if anybody has a connection, one thing we're looking for, a connection to a brewery. We do have a lot of wine that's being donated. We're looking for someone to donate a keg of beer. I'm going to go speak with the 3 Stacks and a Rock folk, but I don't know them personally. If anybody does, please come talk to me. And another thing we need, if you have, we're not doing a silent auction this time around. We are going to do raffles. So if you have maybe a big or a big-ish kind of item that you would be willing to raffle off, either an item, maybe you have a vacation rental you're willing to do a staycation for a night, or you have a service, you massage therapist, or you cut hair, or we can set up a package of that sort of thing, please contact us. We would love your help and support. Okay, so we've got two great speakers tonight. Sherry Hafer is going to come first. She's going to speak to us about cable landings and what's being proposed for Dog Beach in Cayucas. And then we're going to have Alan Alward, who's going to speak to us about the fisherman's perspective, and he's sort of the official liaison for the fishermen in this community in dealing with the offshore wind and the government entities. So he's really a fountain of knowledge, and he can help us understand what's happening. So regarding the cables, I'm going to just show a very quick 2-3 minute video so you can see this is happening on the East Coast as well as here. All right.
Just like yeah. All right, here we go.
Plan that's fueling controversy along the Jersey Shore. Proposed wind farms off the coast have generated both criticism and praise, but there are also concerns about a related project and its potential impact on land. News 4's Ted Greenberg has the story from Monmouth County.
Can you turn it up by any chance?
And
I'm sorry, but we actually have trouble with the sound
Okay.
on this. There are the subtitles.
Yep.
Sorry, folks, it's a 2-minute video.
It's
I
okay.
apologize.
haven't been an activist in my life.
But Lynette Bibiani says she's now charged up and has no choice.
The proposed paths for these cables are 35 feet from my front door.
She's among those in Manasquan and neighboring Cedar, worried about a plan that would run underground electrical transmission cables from up to 4 future offshore wind projects from the ocean through parts of the communities and others on a path to an electrical substation.
We can't halt this project until the risks are objectively evaluated.
At least 1,000 people watched a virtual public meeting held this week by a group fighting the plan. The New Jersey Board of Public Utilities expects to take action on choosing a developer for the transmission lines project this fall.
We are very concerned about what appears to be the first in a nation test of this amount of power being transmitted through a residential neighborhood.
The BPU, though, insists this type of infrastructure is common.
I totally support alternative energy when the plan makes sense.
Residents and local leaders say they're concerned about the possible impact on property values and potential health problems. But the BPU says it has data that shows any electromagnetic radiation from the cables will be negligible at street level and will not affect human health.
It's the studies that exist are not apples to apples. This is
Huge. According to the State Board of Public Utilities, the lines would generally be buried about 3.5 feet to 8 feet underground, but the depth is dependent on the developer and the location. A better solution would be to rethink this plan entirely.
Under the state's current timeline, construction would not start until 2027.
This project is moving like a steamroller.
The Net's hoping it'll take a pause for more studies and assurances on safety. Ted Greenberg, News 4, New York.
So I think everybody knows who I am. I'm been married to a commercial fisherman for the last 39 years. He's the president, or has been the president of the Morro Bay Fish Organization for the last 12 years. So the offshore wind companies came in 2015, 10 years ago. So that's how long I've been involved. And so I didn't understand this issue or know about this issue until I was reading the Tribune, which I don't know why I read, but I do. And they were talking about this project that the Land Conservancy had gotten through. And I said, holy crud, this is exactly where they want to put the cables. Wait a minute, this is protected area. And so we've been trying to inform the city of Morro Bay, the county, the Coastal Commission, hey, you can't permit this here. And of course, it's been crickets. We haven't heard back from anybody, and we've done a lot. So our next thing that we're going to do, they don't respond to emails, so you have to go out in person. So we put together a slideshow, and I'm practicing on you guys because I'm going to put this in front of the city of Morro Bay the 10th. So this, okay, so I was at an Art in the Park festival, and this lady that does photography, shoot, I didn't get her name, but she had this picture of Dog Beach. We lost it. Okay, so Dog Beach is the one open space between Cayucas and Morro Bay that has been owned and managed by Chevron Marine Terminals since 1929. And they operated it for 70 years until they stopped in 1999. It was 3,000 acres that they own of the coastline and up into the hills, where they used to have tanks that they put their oil in. So they have been parsing out these parcels since, and the people of San Luis County got together and said, hey, we want to protect this. And so they divided into 3 areas, the project. The first project is in blue, and that was purchased in 2021. And it was actually purchased using Proposition 1 money, which is for Water Quality Supply and Infrastructure Improvement Act of 2014. So we paid for this to be used for that. And then it was also paid for by the Habitat Conservation Fund, which was created by the California Wildlife Protection Act of 1990. And the funds are to be used for acquisition, restoration, and enhancement of aquatic habitat for spawning and rearing of Andromenous salmonoids and riparian habitat. So that was completed in 2021, and it was entrusted to the city of Morro Bay, the area along the beach. Yeah. So the county is also involved too, because it's actually still outside of the city of Morro Bay's city limits. So we did go speak with Supervisor Monroe, and she's a new one, and she came behind Debbie Arnold, and because we thought maybe we could get some support from her, because what we're asking is for a letter for them to send to the Coastal Commission, which I'll get to. Okay, so you can go to the next one. So there it shows the area that Morro Bay owns. Okay, and go to the next one. So it has what are called restrictive covenants on the property. These are legal covenants that they have to follow by law because of the way they got this property. So it's to restore important species and habitat, to protect water quality and develop a more resilient and sustainable managed water system, acquisition, restoration, and enhancement of aquatic habitat and spawning and rearing of Andromenous salmonoid and riparian habitat, to protect sensitive habitat and federally threatened steelhead trout, red-legged frog, and endangered tidewater gobies, and public access consistent with these purposes. So it goes into the watershed too. Okay, well, Atlas Wind, which is is an LLC of Equinor Wind, which is owned by Norway and British Petroleum. They own the outside lease. There's 3 leases out there in the wind energy area. They own the outside one, and they're the first one to do site surveys. They've been the most aggressive going forward. And they submitted their plan to the Coastal Commission for where they want to put their cables. So, because they have to get a coastal development permit from them to do that. So this was what they submitted, and you can see that the lime green lines are where they're hoping to put their cables. And so go to the next slide. That's up close. So you see that is right at Dog Beach. And the Coastal Commission approved this. July 12th, 2024, at a meeting. There was just no resistance. The only commissioner that actually represents us that voted no on it was not allowed to come back. That was the big turnover that Nicole was talking about. Yeah. Okay, next one. So one of the issues with putting in cables is they use these jet plows that use millions of gallons of water to dig up to 15 feet deep. And it sends plumes of dirt out, and it covers spawning areas. It suspends heavy metals and forever chemicals, contaminating the water and the food web. Next slide. So this is a collage of different projects, and you can see that Dog Beach won't look the same. They have to leave some kind of structure. You can see in this bottom. They have to have some kind of structure that prevents it from becoming unburied. That's one of the biggest problems with all these cables. They become unburied, of course, with all the tides and everything going on. And so there'll be some kind of big structure there, and people won't be able to go in the water there, and even go on the beach. Probably it'll be restricted. So, and look at the destruction. I mean, what's that going to do to the Tidewater Goby? Yeah, it'll be vulnerable for sure. And we don't know how many cables there's going to be. The cables can only handle 300 megawatts of AC current. I don't know how big the DC current cables can be, if they can be bigger maybe. But still, it's going to require 10, 15 cables. So it's going to just destroy a huge section of the beach. Okay. So, and this is the problem with the cables. They break all the time. There's manufacturing defects with delamination, cavities, protrusions, installation issues with contamination, wrongly applied, incorrect dimensions, operational effects, reduction of dielectric strength. You know that wire, that cable wire, it breaks. Overheating, mechanical stress, water ingress, electrolysis, and corrosion. Okay, next slide. So this is a meter that measures electromagnetic fields, and it was put over one high voltage cable on the surface, and it still read 90. What is it called? It still read 90 millicals. Millicals. So just think of 300 times more of that. You know, that's what's going to be happening. This is one high voltage cable from one offshore wind turbine. So I don't know. It'll be multiplied several times. Okay. Yeah, that's true. Because that's just from one turbine. they're combining several turbines into one cable. That's just one. So that's probably at the most a 10 megawatt cable. So, and the problems with electric magnetic fields is they've done studies and they found that lobster and crab eggs that were laid next to these type of cables developed with deformities. Their eyes were deformed, their tails were deformed, they couldn't swim. That's scary. And I heard this one fisherman say, oh, you know, they say they're going to cover the cables with concrete blankets where they can't bury them. Well, that's right where fish lay their eggs. So we'll have all these deformed fish in polluted water. So, and then a lot of species have magnetic tissue in their spines that help them be sensitive to the electromagnetic fields of the earth to help them migrate back to where they breed and eat and whatever, and that's going to be impacted. So, okay, next one. So this is the responsibilities that we think the city of Morro Bay should take. They should decide as owners of Dog Beach property if installing high voltage cables is within the restrictive covenants, which it is not. If not, write a letter to the California Coastal Commission notifying them that installation of offshore wind high voltage cables will not be allowed at Dog Beach. Okay, next one. Save Dog Beach. Thanks to Carol. Okay, that's it. Oh, okay. Well, they wanted to use the tunnel, that intake tunnel to the power plant. Remember, Ala was always wanting to use the tunnel. And it was too close to highly sensitive habitat, so they wouldn't allow that. So they made them go up the beach. But, and see, this is a big deal because if they can't get that area, then they're going to be in trouble because they can't go farther north because of the National Marine Sanctuary. It starts just above there. And they're having trouble getting into the Diablo where they want to go because there's the Point Bashan Marine Protected Area there. So all these protections California's been driving us crazy with are maybe helping us out a little bit. Okay, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so he wanted clarification on why the CEC and the wind companies want to land their cables on Dog Beach. It quite literally is the only place available that's big enough to be able to accommodate as many cables as going to be coming in from the substations that is not protected. Can't come into Morro Bay, too narrow, too small, maybe one or two cables would go in anyway, and then all of the others as Sherry has said. So that's a clarification on that. Quite literally, it's the only place that they can do it, or they think they can do it. The other clarification I want to make, because I saw some people's reactions, was Sherry mentioned that there was Equinor already has a permit for near shore. That permit is for near shore surveys that would be justified by the companies being able to come into Dog Beach for their landings. Well, that justification is not there. So the reality of them getting their permit to do the surveys in nearshore waters is untenable because there is no way that those cables can go in. So I think a lot of you thought that maybe they had gotten a permit to go into shore and to do the work. No, the permit they got was for the nearshore surveys that would potentially be justified for landing their cables on Dog Beach. Is that a little bit clearer, you guys? Okay.
it's not okay for them to do the site surveys in that direction if they can't go that direction. Yeah. I'm just saying I know that they don't have a permit to actually go on shore and install the cables yet, but they have this. They do have a permit to do site surveys in state waters, and it was according to their plan. So, anyways, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah, it is. I Okay, so she's asking this these restrictive covenants are legally binding. So, how could they be able to go into this area? Well, I think what happened was there was such a rush to get this permit in. We found out in June 20th about this plan for them to put it, to get this CDP, because they were going to do it by a de minimis waiver and not even have a public hearing. So we forced that, and then within 3 weeks, by July 12th, they already had a hearing, and they put together a 35-page approval. So, for example, when PG&E wanted to do their seismic surveys, we fought hard in 2012, 12. Yeah. It took them 2 years and 400 pages, and then ended up denying it. So this is what happened. It was pushed through. I I think that there's a misunderstanding with people. They think, oh, let's just slide those cables in. It'll be no big deal. You won't even see it. They'll cover it up. It'll be great. It's not going to be like that at all. And they're trying to paint this rosy picture, but it's going to be, like I said, all this dredging. They're going to have to put some kind of structure to cover it. It's going to be dangerous to swim there. No, it won't be the same. Then they got to get it to the the grid, right near the substation. Yeah, the substation that's by the stacks there. Yeah. So, any other questions? Yeah. So they could do that. There is a provision for eminent domain. And if our administration has it their way, they will do that. They will just push it through. And then there is a provision that they have to give all the money back if they take it. So the wind companies could possibly use eminent domain and then just pay the state back in the Land Conservancy. Well, they tried to get this permission for doing site surveys under what they call de minimis waiver, where, we're not going to cause any damage, it'll be fine, so just sign off under consent agenda. But we forced them to have a hearing on it, which didn't really matter. And we forced them to have to write up a coastal development permit. That was for what I was referencing was when they did it for PG&E's seismic surveys. They did a very thorough job that took 2 years and 400 pages. For this one, it took them 3 weeks and 35 pages. It is a friend. That's why they overlooked that. Oh wow, this property is protected. They can't use this property. So, okay. So I'm going to introduce Alan. Alan is a fellow neighbor boat owner. He's got a degree from Cal Poly in civil engineering, but decided to follow the fishing life. And so he's been a longtime fisherman, diving, albacore fishing. He's crazy. He goes out by himself albacore fishing 100 miles out in the ocean for 3 or 4 months out of the year. So he takes crews sometimes, but he also does deep water groundfish right out in the wind energy areas. Knows all about it. So he's been a director of the Morro Bay Fish Organization since 2014. So he's been through all the thick and thin of offshore wind with us. He also is a co-chair of the Alliance of Communities for Sustainable Fisheries, which is an umbrella organization that supports a lot of fishermen along the coastline. And he was selected by the Coastal Commission for the 7C Working Group. And so he's here to tell us how that's been going. I'll let him explain it to you more. Here's Alan.
Okay, I'm not going to try and speak extemporaneously because I've learned through vast experience that does not work in my case. So I'm going to read this. These are my words. I just didn't have enough chance to practice it to get it out. I will speak extemporaneously if you have questions, and I'll field questions on anything about offshore wind. So my name is Alward, and I have been a commercial fisherman since 1974. I got my start by taking a commercial fishing class at the Southern California Regional Occupational Training Center that was taught on the docks at Port Sacal in San Pedro. That class opened the door for me to get a job on the old halibut schooner named the Deep Six, berthed at Terminal Island in the Port of Los Angeles. And the Deep Six trolled for albacore off the west coast during the summer months. I fished the 1974 albacore season on that boat, and the skipper had elected to do research that summer because he'd had an engine failure, and he had to be sure of what kind of income he got. So he did this research, which was for the National Marine Fisheries Service, the California Department of Fish and Game, the Western Fish Boat Owners Association, and the Navy. And for the Navy, we were just making thermocline tests where you dropped a little thing like a missile off the back of the boat. While the boat was moving, it would tell you where the thermocline changed in the temperature, and the Navy needed to know that for submarine detection. They've got trying to get ships to do that all the time. So I lost my place. So we went 1,500 miles offshore for our first trip to research the offshore albacore fishery, which later became an important part of the albacore fishery. At that time, nobody was fishing more than 100 or 200 miles offshore, and then this whole thing started where guys started going way out there. They even got a pickup freighter to come out and buy from them out there. And then that blossomed. That's still going on. So that trip was 36 days, and we didn't catch much. I remember the skipper asked me to dump the contents of a lidded bucket over the side on our first day out at sea, which contained old salt bait from the previous season. I lost my lunch immediately upon lifting the lid and was seriously seasick for a couple of days. We made 2 more trips that summer, getting as far north as the Queen Charlotte Islands off British Columbia before finally heading home. And I remember the day we saw the Queen Charlotte Islands off in the distance. You know, you could almost tell it was green, but we didn't get any closer. And that was the story of the whole summer. It was a combination of real adventure and a lot of very boring hours. So, and a lot of fishing is like that. You know, you have your moments of excitement, and then you have your long runs here and there. So I moved to Morro Bay in 1977 to attend Cal Poly, originally to major in agriculture engineering. I was living on my 24-foot sailboat on a mooring and commuting to school on a Honda 350 motorcycle. But I fell in with some local divers who were making the transition from abalone fishing to diving for sea urchins because the otters had just showed up and they'd pretty much killed the abalone fishery. So we were going down to Santa Barbara to fish sea urchins. because sea otters eat sea urchins as well as abalone. So after my initial attempt at school, which petered out in academic probation, I went to work as a hose tender on a local dive boat that was harvesting sea urchins out of Santa Barbara. I had been to the channels on my dad's sailboat as a teenager, but working around the islands on a dive boat was a totally different experience. We would poke our noses in amongst the rocks where no responsible yachtsman or commercial fisherman would go, oftentimes in areas exposed to the swell and wind. I'm going blind here. The guy I was working for decided to build his own boat and quit leasing the boat we were working on, and suddenly I went from being a deckhand to being a diver and captain of the boat. After a year of running that boat, I signed on to another local boat, the Janus, which some of you might remember, it's been around here, as a walk-on diver, which means I brought my dive gear, dove on the boat, didn't own it, but it was a good living. And I continued to work for Reed Hawkins on that boat for over 25 years. We dove all the islands off Southern California and then migrated up to the newly emerging sea urchin fishery in Northern California, and even went up to Washington State to try and get our foot in the door in the up-and-coming sea urchin fishery there, which we did not succeed in doing. But Reed eventually took the boat to Alaska in pursuit of sea urchins and sea cucumbers. But I didn't want to make that move, especially as a diver. I was hearing talk about snow on the deck and wearing a face mask so your face didn't sting, and I was already cold enough diving at San Miguel Island. Eventually, I bought my own boat and made the transition from underwater fishing to on-the-water fishing. Sea urchins have been good to me, as it turned out, and it was the financial pinnacle of my career. I went from being an overpaid underwater echinoderm picker to an underpaid above-the-water captain of an albacore trawler, which is basically where I remain today, with the exception that I try to fish sable fish, also known as black cod, using traps in deep water out of Morro Bay during the off-season from November through May. My boat is a sailing fishing boat longfin at the bottom of Beach Street. So when I go albacore fishing, I run up to Oregon and don't come home, and I run up there in June and don't come home until October, and then I go in and out of ports in Oregon, making up to 2-week trips, and I can hold I've had 10 tons, I can theoretically hold 12, and that's basically what I do. I fish alone. The crew is difficult. I have taken our Chief Harbor Patrol officer's children out, Otis and Reese, if you know them. They've each gone and fished with me for a few weeks. But other than that, I go alone. So offshore wind is going to impact me here in Morro Bay and also off the coast of Oregon, where I catch most of my fish. When I fish sablefish out of Morro Bay, I typically go out 20 miles from shore above Point Piedras Blancas, which puts me over 50 miles from the harbor and out where all the coastal shipping traffic is steaming. I typically make 4 or 5 day trips, running out, setting my traps the first day, then pulling and rebaiting each day until I've got my allowable quota. One working day of pulling and resetting takes about 8 hours, but during the rest of the time I'm out there, I have to be paying attention to the shipping traffic on the AIS, or Automatic Identification System, to make sure that some giant container ship doesn't run over me or my traps. Many times I have been woken up in the middle of the night by my AIS announcing that a possible collision with some tanker will occur in 20 minutes, which always gets me out of bed. So even though when the busy 8-hour fishing part of my day is over and I shut off the engine and drift, this is a 24-hour-a-day activity. Tired when I get in. The first problem with putting 378 square miles of windmills out on the sablefish grounds is that each platform is a navigational hazard. The ocean off the west coast is largely a blank slate as far as hazards go. In fact, between Richardson's Rock off Point Conception and the Farallon Islands off San Francisco, there are no natural hazards offshore to worry about. And for that matter, from the Farallons north to the Canadian border, there are no islands, no offshore rocks 20 miles out. So each one of these windmills can be likened to a wash rock that you can wreck on, with the nasty added problem that the water around it is so deep that you can't anchor to avoid drifting onto it if you lose power or steering. The other inconvenient fact about them is that you cannot fish around them because the mooring lines and draping transmission cables between platforms make setting and retrieving any sort of fixed bottom gear impossible. And that is the sort of fishing that takes place in the areas where they will be located. So now we're going to get on to the history, which was promised. So the first serious proposal for an offshore wind project here in Morro Bay came in 2015 when Alla Weinstein came to town with what was then called Trident Wind. The federal government was just beginning to push for offshore wind, and most of the early goings-on were centered on the East Coast. Alla wanted to get ahead of the curve and had an idea for using the existing grid connection at the shuttered Morro Bay power plant to distribute power brought ashore from her proposed wind farm. She had previously worked on an offshore wind project in Portugal and had dealt with the fishermen there, so she knew that her project would affect us. We knew nothing about offshore wind farms, except that we knew we didn't want them, just like you don't want gophers showing up in your backyard. She warned us that the feds were very proactive about this and convinced us that we should take the issue seriously. As fishermen, we knew that our government takes itself very seriously and doesn't think much of commercial fishing, so we decided that we had better make the best of a bad situation and work with Alla to try and preserve as much of our livelihoods as we could. We appreciated that she understood that offshore wind would have a negative effect on commercial fishing, and that she was willing to explore how we could create an agreement between the two industries to limit harmful interactions and to mitigate unavoidable ones. We would come to appreciate her attitude much more once BOEM got involved, but I'll get to that later. Together, we spent the next 3 years forming the Castle Wind Agreement. We felt we were setting a precedent that other fishermen could use in other areas. Our agreement with Alla was for 120 square miles of territory in deep water and was within the borders of what today is the Morro Bay lease area. There has been a lot of complaint by fishermen and others about BOEM's siting process. It's true, it stinks. Much of the Morro Bay lease area is an essential fish habitat and habitat of particular concern. It's only fair to tell you, however, that early in our negotiation with Alla, we asked her to move her development from directly out in front of Morro Bay further north, which we considered to be less used because of the greater distance from the harbor. She explained to us that the transmission cables cost about $1 million a mile. So making that move would cost an extra $20 million or so. But to her credit, she accommodated us. So just like BOEM, we failed to appreciate the long-term consequences this would have on sensitive habitat. But you have to keep in mind that at this point, we didn't really understand a lot about the negative aspects of offshore wind. To put it mildly, the offshore wind industry has never been very forthcoming about negative impacts. In fact, the government offshore wind juggernaut seems only to cheerlead. Now, as I said, we knew nothing about offshore wind in the beginning, but to her credit, Alla brought us along with the evolving technology, explaining every aspect of the design and construction of a wind array, the financing, the government approval processes, as these things continue to change and evolve over the following years. As a result, when the government agency meetings began, I frequently felt I knew more about the workings of offshore wind than the agency people charged with administering it. Alla explained to us that she was going to make what is called an unsolicited bid to BOEM to build an offshore wind array off Morro Bay. This means that she, as a developer, was going to ask BOEM to develop an area that BOEM had no plans as of yet to develop. She also warned us that under BOEM's rules, this could very well trigger BOEM to put out a notice for any other parties that might be interested in developing the area. This came to pass, and there were immediately 5 other interested players wanting to develop, some of them really big players like Statoil, a 50% Norwegian government-owned oil company that was a big offshore wind developer in Europe. So in response to that interest, BOEM then created the Morro Bay lease area so that 3 developers would each have leases the size of the one Alla Weinstein had proposed. an auction notice for those leases was given, our prospect of one 125 square mile wind farm had just tripled. We were not happy about that fact. In fact, we were quite alarmed. The only thing we had to cling to was our agreement with Allah and Castle Wind. Our agreement was quite generous, we felt at the time, so if there were 3 leases, our agreement would at least ensure that we could absorb the damage, at least in the near term, if the other developers signed on. We were sure that with the state and federal government heavily pushing offshore wind, we were going to get steamrolled, and the only question was if the steamroller was going to take an arm or a leg or go right up the middle and make us complete roadkill. I remember writing at the time that our agreement with Allah was mutually beneficial, and we, meaning local fishermen, were all right with it, and that the Bohm lease area tripling that damage was like being in a war and agreeing to a truce. That is because at the time, Bohm also had plans for the Diablo Canyon lease area, another 400 square miles, directly outside and south of Morro Bay, some of the best fishing around and near both Morro Bay and Port San Luis. This lease area persists on maps today, even though the Department of Defense totally nixed it. If Bohm had taken the Diablo area too, and they really, really wanted it, because it's right outside Diablo Canyon and that's where the power lines want to go, if they had taken it, it would have nearly killed ground fishing out of Morro Bay, and that is the #1 fishery we have left. But Morro Bay and the state weren't done. This was just a pause in a relentless drive that eventually earmarked 4,500 square miles of offshore wind in California as its goal for the year 2045. Allah had assured us that Castle Wind and its new financial partner, Total Energy of France, would bid whatever it takes to win one of the leases. Unfortunately, and I believe it was because the other companies were bidding without the burden of having a signed mitigation compensation agreement with fishermen, Total was unwilling to go the distance, and 3 other companies received our precious fishing grounds. 3 companies that were totally unwilling to even consider our agreement. So now we're finally going to get to the 7C Working Group, as promised. The California 7C Working Group was created by Senate Bill 286 and was part of California's consistency determination under the California Coastal Zone Management Act for Bohm's new offshore wind leases. The 7C bit was actually a line in the consistency determination document. It establishes the working group, supervised and mediated by the California Coastal Commission for the purposes of mitigating, compensating all negative effects of offshore wind to commercial, recreational, and tribal fishing communities, including affected shoreside businesses, by creating a framework for industry-to-industry agreements to adhere to and by establishing communication protocols and best practices for both parties. Included in the language was with due regard for existing agreements, although the California Coastal Commission was quick to let the new leaseholders know that they would need to wait for the framework to be created and that they shouldn't sign on to the existing Castle Wind Agreement, which we had meanwhile modified to allow the 3 leaseholders to do just that. I soon learned that the 3 leaseholders in no way resembled a la Weinstein and Castle Wind. The offshore wind industry was coming off a string of successes with muzzled environmental protests, supercharged with federal subsidies, and new permit streamlining priorities forwarded by Bohm. Bohm had never actually said that the developers had to do anything. Everything contained in Bohm's language was a guideline or recommended, and we were informed by Bohm in a meeting in Morro Bay, much to our surprise, that Bohm has no authority to create policy to require the offshore wind developers to mitigate or compensate fishermen for anything. The developers' view was that these developments are in federal waters, and therefore anything having to do with the lease area proper was strictly under Bohm's discretion, and they were not bound by anything the working group produced, and maybe we could jolly them along into making some concessions, but nothing was to be established that said should or is required to. This was a far cry from what we expected. For one thing, we didn't think we were going to have to convince anyone that there were going to be impacts from site survey. Allah had acknowledged that, and under our existing agreement, all Morro Bay and Port San Luis fishermen will receive 10% of the agreed settlement amount at the lease signing to compensate for immediate devaluation of our businesses, and 20% at the beginning of site survey for impacts from site survey. The final 70% was awarded at the beginning of construction, which is when the real circus begins. Now, those are called direct payments and go to individual boat-owning fishermen. There was another component of the Castle Wind Agreement that created a resiliency fund modeled on the Central Coast Joint Cable Fisheries Liaison Committee, which has been benefiting the local fishing community and the two harbors, Port San Luis and Morro Bay, for over 20 years. The Resiliency Fund is what will truly empower fishermen. Like the Central Coast Joint Cable Fisheries Liaison Committee, it will help us to have a voice in government hearings by giving us a means to employ consultants and lobbyists to speak for us while we are out fishing. And it will get us some respect from local government as we work in partnership with the city and the harbor department to get important projects done. The Cable Committee pays expenses for the harbor director and the city manager to attend CMANC every year to lobby for funds for our harbor in Washington, and we have helped with many other things. There are many local fishing organizations that have zero power to accomplish anything because of lack of funds, and the empowered people tend to have a vision that gets things done. The Resiliency Fund is also expressly designed to lower, I'm talking about the Resiliency Fund the 7th Sea Working Group is talking about now. The Resiliency Fund is also expressly designed to lower the cost of fishing to help keep all local fishermen more profitable and land more product in spite of the encroachment of offshore wind. It does this through cost of fishing subsidies like fuel subsidies, bait subsidies, ice subsidies, insurance, and many other programs that we are trying to get established. The working group was not created until a year after it was legally established by SB 286, a year that was wasted that we wish we had put to use, as the entire output of the working group is due by the end of this year, and we are a long way from being finished. We are only just now getting down to the really difficult part of how to quantify impacts that can't be avoided and what the two components look like, direct payments for affected fishermen and resiliency payments to lower the cost of fishing. To the Coastal Commission's credit, after months of hand-wringing and cringing when the developers called their authority into question, at a recent full working group meeting, 2 lawyers for the Coastal Commission delineated the Coastal Commission's authority and upheld it under questioning by the developers. So we have finally established that the Coastal Commission has the authority to require developers to enter into agreements to mitigate and compensate fishermen. Whether or not we will get a satisfactory result, I have no idea. The governor is leaning awfully hard on all concerned government agencies to make the way straight for offshore wind. And we have seen some supportive staff and appointed commission members hustled off the stage. And against all logic, the state is not embracing the concept of look before you leap and still wants to circle in a holding pattern until the next federal election before skipping back down the path to full build-out of 4,500 square miles of offshore wind. So when I was writing this, I had some things that I wanted to say about offshore wind that I kind of think get undercovered. I mean, I'm aware of a lot of the environmental stuff. In fact, I'm deeply aware. Sherry brings me up on anything I don't know. But these are some things that as a fisherman, I feel like I have an insight to that maybe others don't. So I know from diving around boats anchored on windy days that anchor chains that are moving under stress stir up clouds of sediment that travel through the water on the current. This can be a significant environmental effect at large scale. In fact, a study I recently read states that in the Mediterranean, they don't approve offshore wind development in sensitive areas because offshore wind farms prevent those areas from acting like nurseries for sea life. It goes on to recommend a buffer zone between offshore wind development and sensitive areas. And as I said before, these leases off our coast are in sensitive areas by definition. I also knew from fishermen's stories about one boat dragging anchor in an anchorage could snag another boat's anchor and dislodge it, and so on, creating a chain reaction. The possibility for problems in an array of floating windmills with relatively nearby shipping traffic and nearly overlapping mooring anchors looks to me like a recipe for a possible disaster. I was talking with a Coast Guard safety inspector on my boat a while back, and he told me that it's not uncommon for large ships to lose power and drift until they can make repairs and get a tow. The problem with floating offshore wind is the water is so deep you can't drop anchor to avoid drifting into danger, and a towboat is most likely many hours away. I keep bringing up in the working group that these platforms need to be designed with ladders so survivors of a collision and sinking can drag themselves up to safety. This seems to go over like a lead balloon. It's a real concern for me. I've been on a sinking boat. Well, yeah, the helicopters can't go into the wind array. There's several problems. I know that the Cape San Martin buoy was knocked off its mooring and set adrift in the vicinity of the Morro Bay lease area by a ship strike. So, I mean, these things do happen. The Dominator in Palos Verdes ran up. They were using a radar direction finder, and they were headed for Long Beach, but they didn't see that Palos Verdes stuck out in between them and there. And they ran right up there, and things like that happen. There's freighter on the back of Santa Rosa Island. Sometimes there's nobody in the wheelhouse, you know. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things that go on. So I know that any earthquake with lateral movement of the seabed would snap buried transmission cables, possibly taking an entire array off the grid for months, because it takes time to get a ship to come, maybe across the ocean, raise the thing up, patch it. But my worst nightmare is a violent coast-wide storm like the Columbus Day storm of 1962, which far exceeded the norm for violent weather off the West Coast. In a longtime local fisherman, Travis Evans's book, The Remarkable Plans for Captain Travis O. Evans, he describes being out on the ocean fighting for survival that day and hearing a new nearby Coast Guard cutter report winds at its location of 125 miles an hour. Wikipedia says that the 1962 Columbus Day storm was probably the strongest extratropical cyclone, which means above the tropics in our case, of the 20th century, with winds up to 180 miles an hour. Winds and accompanying seas like that could very possibly trigger offshore wind mooring failure over the entire West Coast, resulting in much of California's projected 4,500 offshore wind platforms on the beach in a giant tangle of steel cables festooned with surf-ground plastic blade mulch like Christmas tree flocking. By the time of full build-out, the offshore wind grid will be relying on that offshore wind power, and the loss of a great portion of it for years while the mess is being cleaned up and maybe rebuilt will mean years of blackouts and brownouts for everyone in California who depends on the grid. I brought all this up in comments to the California Energy Commission. They have plowed ahead with the rush to build out what I consider to be a short-sighted gamble that stands a significant chance of being a colossal failure. And this is just practical stuff and doesn't even take into consideration the effects on the environment, sea life, and commercial fishing. I want to emphasize that the threat offshore wind presents to the grid, a threat that is something like an iceberg in the present dialogue on offshore wind. People know it exists, but don't really grasp the mass of it and what it will mean if the throw of the dice goes wrong. The CEC is supposed to be the adult in the room that doesn't let us gamble with the security of the grid. And I think they are failing us in this regard. I know that if you have a number of different possible failure modes and a percentage of likelihood for each failure, the likelihood of one of them happening over 38 years is greater than any one case alone. I fully expect one or more significant incidents over the lifetime of these projects that collapses the statewide grid for a month or more, and that this is a huge problem with the rush to full build-out of what can only be described as experimental technology. If we can't stop it, we at least have to slow it. The problem is that it has tremendous financial and political momentum. And while President Trump has pulled the plug for now, it is obvious our state is intent on waiting him out. So, any questions? Yes.
Well, I haven't been out the ocean as you have at all. Storms? Do you experience lightning?
Yeah, I was out one time off of Oregon. It wasn't. It was more of a squall. The wind suddenly came up. I had a new mainsail that didn't have any reef points in it. And all of a sudden, the sky got really dark, and I remember being at the mast, looking up and seeing lightning going across the sky above my head, thinking, this is not good. Yeah. I have a friend who describes being out in the ocean in a sailboat and seeing lightning strike the water so close that he could see the water boil. So, yeah, that happens.
So the mast is like a lightning rod.
Yeah, right, or it should be. Yeah. Well, they get hit by lightning, and then you see these videos of them smoking. Sometimes that's lightning doing that.
Well, isn't that enough to knock blades?
Yeah. I don't. The blades are non-conductive. If they're wet, maybe.
Well, I'm just saying, if the turbine gets blasted by, 30,000, 50,000 volts.
Well, it sets them on fire, and the ones on land, you see them topple.
Well, and all the CFCs, that whatever 50 gallons of CFCs just goes right into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
The chlorofluorocarbons, the mechanism. It's like greenhouse gas.
All that junk.
And the blades are only expected to last about 5 years. And so that requires towing in, replacement. Thank you. Yeah, I can. No, it's in a Word document. Yeah. Okay.
We should have it as a PDF available through our group.
It's
We can talk about that. Yeah.
Okay.
People can have it.
Okay. Next question. Yeah, you.
I wanted to read you this because it's further evidence of what an abject fake feeling.
Do you want to use the mic so that
Yeah.
pick it up?
Come on up.
Okay. It's from a poster that was on the Red Hill University website. A 2-megawatt windmill is made up of 260 tons of steel that required 300 tons of iron ore and 170 tons of coking coal, all mined, transported, and produced by hydrocarbons. A windmill could spin until it falls apart and never generate as much energy as was invested in building it.
I have a friend in Humboldt. He's on the 7th Sea Working Group too. Very knowledgeable guy, Ken Bates, and he got word that from year 5 to year 15, they have to cycle all the windmills in for maintenance. Well, in Humboldt, they have a weather problem and a sea problem. So there's only certain times when that's possible. The channel in Humboldt right now is 35 feet. In order to accommodate what they're planning, they have to dredge that channel to 60 feet. That's 13 million cubic yards of dredge material. And if you're familiar with Humboldt Harbor and Arcata Bay, it's a sensitive area. That kind of operation, sedimenting up Arcata Bay, and it increases the flow rate of the water through there. There's lots of problems with that. But for fishermen, the problem is that now you're in competition for time to get in and out of the harbor on the good days, because they've been building these things and they're going to store them in the harbor, and they're going to try and hustle them out whenever the weather's good. And whenever they're moving one, we suspect that it's going to be closed to transit by fishermen. I talked to a guy, and we're recording this, I'm not going to say his name, but he said that in order to get all the windmills out using Humboldt, it would take them 35 years because of all these problems, And so that was a little disconcerting. He got moved right away, he no longer was talking to fishermen. But yeah.
I have a question about, what you do is so valuable, not just as a profession, but also because you're feeding people. And so I'm wondering if that is part of the conversation at all with the government officials in the 7 seas, because they're going to be, essentially, if you're getting mitigated because you're having less catch.
Well, so that's one of the reasons that the Coastal Commission is actually pretty big on the Sustainability Fund. So the Sustainability Fund is designed to encourage fishing, so to try to make up for the loss of product that we expect. And we thought we might have trouble with that, because that's a fund that supports all fishermen in the local port, and the wind companies are saying, no, we're only going to mitigate and compensate people that are directly affected, which means the handful of people that are actually out there in the lease area. And we're having to fight to expand that. But the Coastal Commission's on board with the Resiliency Fund, and it's getting to become an accepted thing that, you have to make up for it. I like to remind people that England was on rationing for 10 years after World War II ended. Food is not always there. You can have things happen. It's important, You don't want to undermine that. We already import 90% of our seafood, and there's a lot more fish that could be caught out of here. The Magnuson-Stevenson Act says that all fishing resources are supposed to be prosecuted to something approaching their sustainable level. And fishermen believe in that. We don't want to overfish. We know what happens when you do that. We've been down that block. But there's also in the Magnuson-Stevenson Act a clause that says, and in lieu of scientific knowledge, the fishing quotas will be designed conservatively. And what a lot of groups have used that as a tool, that a lot of fisheries aren't being utilized at anywhere near their potential. So there is a lot of fish out there. There used to be a whole lot of product landed here. I'd also like to tell you one thing that I learned. I was traditionally against trawling. As a sea urchin diver, I thought I was a real environmentally responsible person, because I was going down there and picking each sea urchin, nothing else getting harmed or anything. And I thought, well, those trawlers are bad. They're killing all these young fish and throwing them back over the side dead that they can't keep. But I was talking with a trawler not too long ago, a few years ago, and he said, we go back and trawl the same area over and over again because it's safe for us. As soon as we depart from that, we don't know what's going to happen. And the big danger is you hang up your net, you've just lost $100,000, probably double that these days. So they would go back and troll the same area over and over again, and they would get the same catch over and over again. So the idea that trawling is such a no-no, especially these days when it's so very limited, I would just like to give them a little bit of respect, because it's not as bad as what has been sold. So and fishermen have to stick up for each other, because if you don't, there's always somebody ready to swing an axe at you.
It's funny, it seems like the fish have adapted to proliferating in areas where the bycatch is a food source. So you get more
that makes sense. I did talk to a local fisherman, and he told me something I didn't know. He's Bill Blue, sablefish fisherman, now president, succeeded Tom, Morro Bay Commercial Fishermen's Organization. He told me that since the site surveys, when he said when the fishing was good, you would see the sablefish would come aboard and they'd have these little red things in their mouths. And he said those are salps, a kind of a salt. Now, when I think of a salp, I think about a thing that floats in the water column and is clear, but evidently there's this other thing. And it's what sablefish eat. And he said since the survey, he hasn't been seeing the salps. And this is, so there's a problem with these acoustic surveys that does not get investigated. The powers that be are kind of unwilling to investigate it. And that is, all the concern has been about marine mammals. And if you're using a certain number of decibels on the surface that they're allowed to use under the post-2013 rules, the whales have to be kept 300 yards, 500 yards away because they'll have tissue damage that would be bad for them. Well, in the surveys that have been going on here recently in deep water, they're using AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, and they're operating 40 meters above the water, 120 feet. And they're using the same power, but they're only 40 meters off the bottom. And a lot of fish have a stage in their life cycle, larvae, where they travel out to deep water and they come back, and crabs and things like that. And so if you have a site survey and you look at the track of the site survey, and here's the lease area, and it's just like this. You know, the whole lease area gets covered. There's no area uncovered. And if you're cooking the bottom and killing all these embryo and whatever damage is done, that has a long-term effect. You may not see it right away. If you kill a bunch of crab larvae, it might be 3 years before the commercial-sized crab would have been there. But I'm not saying that that's necessarily what's happening, but I'm saying, let's investigate it. And they're saying no. They're saying, well, we can't afford that, and it's unlikely, you know. So there's been no attention paid to fish or fish prey or anything in the benthic environment, and I just would like to see that investigated, you know, and responsibly. And before they did these surveys, they did no before studies. They collected no data, and so on the 7C Working Group, we're supposed to be designing mitigation compensation based on impacts. If you don't gather the data to find out what the impact was, you can't design the compensation. So it's frustrating. Go ahead. Well, yeah, I'm very familiar with that argument, and I'm very familiar with the rebuttal. Is that they've done an assessment of the carbon, you know, use and compensation of wind farms, and it's nil. It's a wash. And at one point they were saying, well, you know, all right, we missed on carbon, but we're going to reduce our dependency on you know, oil from out of the country, and that is a desirable goal, and you know, it's desirable. But the other thing offshore wind does is if it slows the currents down on the surface, two things happen. You have less upwelling, less plankton, less carbon sequestered, less oxygen made, but you also have a raise in the temperature on the surface, and that does the same thing. So the whole climate change is a drum. This Chicken Little, you know, the sky is falling. I don't see it. what I really think is happening is you have these powerful offshore wind companies. They're pushing and pushing and pushing, and they're not bad people. I mean, when they initially got into it, they were thinking, you know, this is a good thing to do, and it's an opportunity, and let's do it. And once the momentum got going, you know, with people investing in it, they want to invest in green things, so they invest in offshore wind, and then you get politicians who have set their careers on this. It's got this momentum, and when you Schellenberger tells this story really great. I don't know if any of you heard him, but you know, once you figure out, wait a minute, this isn't very good at all, you know, it's the momentum, and people have got so much stake in it that it's hard to stop. There was a guy in an email today who said it's like trying to stop a freight train with a cardboard box. You know, it's difficult. Yeah, yeah, and I think, of course, right now, without the government subsidies, offshore wind is dead in the water, because it was like a cancer that needed a certain thing to keep going, and without that, it doesn't function on its own. You know, economically, I think it will prove to be, you know, unfeasible. When people see their bills and they're 3 to 5 times more, and when people start having blackouts and brownouts, because I read the study that REACT recently put out by, what was her name, Coates? I read the first 34 pages, and of course I was working on this, so I couldn't finish it, but the first 34 pages were so good. I thought, you know, here it is, you know, right here. It's not going to work. I've heard the same thing in England. You know, they had a 28 days when the wind didn't blow, and they had to go and fire up a coal plant that had been shuttered, and they talk about, what is it, energy poverty, people that can't afford to heat their houses, and I mean, and then the whole thing about grid inertia and all the technical problems with integrating. You have to have interim power. You have to have gas plants on standby. They're the only thing that can ramp up and down quickly. You can't go for 100%. It's completely unrealistic. You're going to need gas, and until you get storage. And the only thing on the horizon that looks remotely like that might work is hydrogen, which is scary in itself. You know, that I think they have to store the hydrogen at 9,000 pounds per square inch to make it a liquid. So, you know, I mean, you want one of those in your backyard? Like what was the Hindenburg, you know? Okay. They need a mile separation. Well, I saw something on YouTube the other day, which was a oil platform in the North Sea during a tremendous storm, and it was doing this. Well, wind turbines can't do this, and they can't be spinning and do this. But if they're really doing this, then there's other problems that start happening. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I know in my boat, when I go up to a wind turbine and it's 1,000 feet above me, it's going to be intimidating, you know, really intimidating. And I'll be worried that the engine's going to quit and the wind's not blowing. And, you know, am I going to be able to pull off this thing, you know? Well, yeah. I mean, I'm on the working group, and I get my voice, and I speak up at things. There's a movement now to appreciate what do they call it? What do they call anecdotal evidence from fishermen. It's been around for a little bit of a while. We are out there. Nobody else is. We see what goes on. I'm out I'm really close to the wind area. I think I'm just above it. I've been fishing there for years because I found it was a place I could go where I didn't run into other fishermen, because that's a big problem when you're setting, mile-long thing of gear. You don't want to have somebody else come and sit near you. If stuff comes up together, it's a tremendous tangle. So I'm out there fishing, and when I shut down at night, within a half an hour, there's a whale next to the boat. There's something about it that might be the water sloshing in the bilge or something, and they're attracted to that. And there are whales out there. There are. Anytime you get the binoculars out and look around, there's whale there, whale there, whale there. A lot more whales than there used to be. The whale population's gone up incredibly over my lifetime, but they exist, and there's a lot. One day I saw 3 beaked whales, which I'd never seen a beaked whale in my life. But I got the binoculars out and just happened to see one's head come up out of the water as they took off. It was funny because the 3 of them were going along through the water like this, then they turned just like this, all 3 together in formation. They stopped and looked at me for a while. And they were a long ways away. I had to get the binoculars out. But then when they turned, this one put his head up, and I said, oh, my God, it's a beaked whale. I'd never seen one before. There's all kinds of things out there. Albatross, and when I'm leaving the grounds, I've got my traps on board. I've got all my fish off. I'm headed in, and I've got the last bait jars, and I'm out there opening the tops of them, dumping the bait over the side. There's not a bird around. You can't see a bird. There's no birds. There's a bird. Where did he come from? He came from way up there, and he saw what I was doing, and he came down. The argument is the birds don't fly above 60 feet or something. That's not right. Okay, go. You've been waiting patiently. Nope.
And it's been suppressed. They don't want people to know. I think it's.
Are they using corn? Synthetic. Yeah.
A guy, it's Whiskey Hill Farms, north of Moss Landing. His name is Dave. Oh, that thing. And he distilled the ethanol using, now he uses waste products from restaurants because it's illegal for them to go into the landfill.
Okay.
He mixes that with bycatch.
Oh.
And some other thing, I can't think of it right now. And then he uses the solvent for making fantastic fertilizer, which is a very
Sounds good.
in demand product now. So it's a win-win thing. And he's getting ethanol. The corn thing, that's another propaganda story from the oil people, because they want you to think they're using your food.
Oh.
It's not like that.
Okay.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. I just wanted to maybe comment on what you said. Charles talked about the weather being a problem, nothing away. And just to say that his floating technology, when they pitch, we're talking about pitching, they have to turn them off. If it's greater than 7 degrees,
Pretty often, yeah. What they're finding is that the amount of time they can actually operate is less than advertised. So many things that give grief. Thanks.
Whoops. That was what a unique perspective. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I personally learned a lot. And if you share your speech with us, we can upload it to our website for people who want to read it and be part of the record. Yes, we're going to get this wonderful recording, and we'll be able to post it to our YouTube page, which is where we have the other meetings. So thank you, everyone. It's been a really enlightening evening. If you could help contribute to our rent for tonight, we love meeting at the Benedict. So thanks for if you've got a few dollars to put in our donation jar. We always appreciate that. We have the posters. Please take those. We have yard signs. We're asking for a $10 donation for that. If you have any questions, talk to any of the board here. And remember, July 26th, put that on your calendar. Please sign up if you can help the day of to volunteer. And do you want to do a quick? Yeah, about what happened. Thank you.
So, last February, we came in front of the court against the State Lands Commission, State Coastal Commission, all three wind companies, and a survey boat that the Coastal Commission gave a permit for doing offshore wind surveys, CSA Engineering. And the case was that they went ahead and issued this permit to do the surveys in federal waters without going through the legal process that SB 286 that Alan talked about required data collection and monitoring and mitigation to be established through the working group before they began. And it's all written in the language, that this needs to be done. And that's why we were so totally surprised when they went ahead and gave out that permit. Well, the judge just totally threw out our case, and so we appealed it. And it's taken all this time because during this last year, since February, we've been getting all the communications from the Coastal Commission, which have been really interesting. They based the BOEM that the Coastal Commission took all their okie dokie from, the study that they used was based on all irrelevant information. They didn't use a study of AUVs and the underwater transponder systems that use 206 decibels at 10 hertz, 40 meters off the bottom. No, they used studies from surface vessels. So it's totally irrelevant to our study. But then they said, well, it should be fine, and they let it go. So anyways, we looked over all those communications and how it got approved. We put together another big brief with laws, saying that the judge had said there was no moratorium, saying they couldn't go ahead. And so he put out a whole legal argument, where it wasn't a moratorium. It was a condition that was required. So anyways, Bill spent thousands of hours on it. It's all pro bono. So we really were hoping that this judge would come around. Judge Van Ruin is his name. So we had our hearing, and you get what's called a tentative judgment before. He just totally blew us off. He actually said that there's no no statutory language requiring monitoring and mitigation before site surveys begin. I mean, it was written that way, so I don't get what he's saying, So, anyways, I don't think he's going to change his mind. He asks the dumbest question. The judge goes, So what does giving a permit for site surveys have to do with the public trust doctrine? Well, that was our whole case. Our whole case was that the Constitution of California protects commercial fishermen. And these are all the laws and protections that are in place to do that. And so you have to make sure, especially when you're surveying over essential fish habitat, that you're not destroying that fishery. Those fisheries are protected. And you have to, if you don't know for sure, you have to do something, to make sure you have an idea. And anyways, the judge just asked that question. I was just like, oh God, we don't have a case. He didn't read it. He was predetermined. Yeah, he just knew what he's going to do. So we've already said we're going to appeal to higher court. So that'll be next. We're going to go to Ventura next. Yeah. The truth will come through, hopefully. I don't know. We'll see.